lender issue is not an issue dealing with the home inspection. You're out of the due diligence period in terms of the home inspection time period, and the buyer just wakes up one morning and chooses to walk away. Now, that particular buyer could in fact lose the earnest money, but that's not all they can possibly lose. Anytime this situation has happened to me or one of the people that I represent, and even my colleagues, and they ask for my opinion, I'm saying, listen, let that particular person who's going to walk away from a legal binding agreement speak to an actual licensed attorney, because you move into a whole nother realm of deep potential litigation, and the earnest money is the least thing that you can actually lose. Because if you put this in front of a jury, you put this in front of a judge, the judge may say, well, you know what, this particular seller made X, Y, and Z moves based on this binding agreement that you had with the seller and this buyer initially. Now, not only do you lose your earnest money, but this person here went out and they put earnest money down. They went out and spent money. They went out and did X, Y, and Z. So they need to be compensated for the efforts and things that they did. And so my role as a licensed real estate professional is to get every potential buyer or seller who choose or considering walking away from a deal in front of a licensed attorney, and let the attorney let the attorney explain to them in detail exactly what it is they're up against as relates to being able to purchase a home and how that's going to flow if in fact they choose to walk away from the deal. And so I think that's something that's critically important and we need to be fully understood. And so and of course, rates change. In some cases, you start down a road in terms of one degree of expectations in terms of what the mortgage is going to be, what the deposit needs to be, and the more and more time pass, the more detailed information you get back from the lender, because the lender is initially basing things on oftentimes of an assessment in terms of, like, once you produce the documents, we're able to get your numbers around X, Y, and Z, and also too, on a day-to-day basis, the actual interest rates fluctuate, and of course, we know interest rates now are far higher than they've been in any time in the near future. I mean, in the near past, and so it puts a buyer in a position where they're paying more money for a smaller house. I mean, this is just the reality of the situation, but the buyer does have a right to walk away, but they also have a responsibility to fully understand exactly what's necessary in order to be able to build on and kind of go from where they are to where they want to be. That's whether under contract and out of contract, and just thinking like, you know what, I'll lose that $2,000 is not a big deal. But I caution you to think that's the only potential repercussion that the seller has, because once you sign a legal binding agreement, the seller does have a right to litigate, and those litigations can be lengthy and also expensive and potentially derail the buyer from buying anytime even in the distant future. And so that's something to be mindful of as a real estate professional as you speak to your clients, but also too for the general public, buyers specifically, and also sellers, that when you walk away from a deal, it's not just an emotional decision. It's not just cut and dry by saying, like, you know what, I don't want to keep their earnest money on the selling side, and the buyer saying, well, you know what, I don't care about giving up the earnest money on the buy side. But you have far more to lose than just the earnest money. So I'm always one to immediately get that particular client in front of a licensed attorney in order to be able to explain to them the potential ramifications based on what it is they're looking to do and how they're looking to kind of maneuver and go forward from there. Yeah. So just being able to be mindful is critically important. I wasn't able to see any specific data as it relates to, other than maybe, I don't know, if the metropolitan area in Atlanta was the highest because they had the highest rate of potential offers and contracts at any given time period for 2025, because that could be one of the reasons why they have the higher failure rate as well. So you have to look past the headlines and dive deeper and deeper into the situations to be able to understand and fully get a grasp of how things go in your particular area. The bottom line is that as a buyer, as a home seller, being able to be mindful of the unique position that you find yourself in as it relates to putting in a contract, putting in an offer, and you shouldn't be rushed by a lender. You should not be rushed by your real estate professional, and neither you should be rushed by family members or just arbitrary clock that you put in your own head saying, you know what, I need to do this by this particular time frame. I think every home buyer should go into the process of home buying as a marathon as opposed to a sprint. Because it's easy for us to look at HGTV, for example, and to be able to look at like, oh, okay, cool, they went and looked at 3 houses, everything is good to go. They're going to find themselves in a position where, basically, they went and done. They look at 3, 4 houses, boom, they bought a house, and they show the after effects that the home, the home is occupied by the family. They turn in the house into a home, and all those things look great. But the reality of it is, on the ground, excuse me, is that it just doesn't happen that way. The reality is that oftentimes you have to look for an extended period of time. During the open house on this past Sunday I just did, I was speaking, I'm always curious to know, are you just getting started, or have you started in the past, and are you right back looking? I would say at least 50% of the people that come through most of my open houses is that they have either sold a home in the past, decided to rent, waited on the fence to see exactly what the market was going to do. Because of course I completely understand, if I was proactively in the market to purchase a home to live in, I probably would move with some degree of trepidation, saying, you know what, man, if I can wait it out a little bit longer, prices may go down. But the reality of it is that home prices are consistently going up. So much so, the next segment that we're going to parlay into is that 16.9% of appreciation on average happened in the Memphis metropolitan area in 2025. Let me say that again. On average, across the country, looking at the NAR data, that home values went up about 6 to 7% across the board nationally. But specifically here in the Memphis metropolitan area, home values grew roughly about just under 17%, anywhere between 8 to 17%, given any prospective area in the metropolitan for 2025. So sitting around waiting on home prices to drop, I just don't see it being in the cards. Yes, you can say that I'm biased because I'm in the real estate industry, but just statistically, we just take this 2026, we just take the last 5 years and see what home prices went from 2020 to now. Of course, we know 2020 to 2023, typically the pandemic years, was a huge amount of appreciation. In some cases, 50, 60, 70% in a lot of areas across the country and a lot of areas here locally. I was speaking to a colleague a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about her client is selling the house. The client bought the house about 3.5 years ago. 3.5 years ago. And the home seller is selling the home, and they're probably going to walk away with roughly about just under $100,000 in profit from the home, and they only own the home roughly about 3.5 years. And so that was an anomaly based on the way that the cyclical cycle of sales and appreciation have happened over the last 30 years. But the reality of it is that we cannot discount that, extract that out of the actual data, because it's a part of how we get to the current